Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about testing. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, I work with a QA and my manager says that the developers should not be testing the code. Why should developers not, why are they not supposed to test their own software? Well, um, I don't know what to tell you here because there are two. There's your manager's perspective on this, and I am 99% sure I know what that person means. And then there is the rational thing that you can think, which I hope I can convey in a very nice way now. So, what your manager is trying to tell you is that if they have a QA, that means that they are paying an individual to sit and test your code for you, manually usually testing that code. And that means that they are valuing your time higher than that person in that space. In other words, since the QA can't do the development work, logically as a naive manager I will go, well, that means that if I have the QA, then the developer shouldn't be testing. They should focus only on the writing of the code, right? Because you're the only person who can in the equation who can do that. So you should optimize for that. I've been working with a developer. I had a manager like this. He did not last long, and that is because it's a very simple and naive equation, right? Person hired to do the testing should do the testing. Person hired to do the development should do the development. Because although the developer can do the testing, it's like that's why you have doctors and nurses, or lawyers and the assistants, or whatever. Like you have someone's doing one thing that the other one can't do, so makes sense, right? The problem though is that this leads to shitty relationships between the people in the company many of the times. It leads to really lazy, horrible developers and slower delivery times, because when the developers get into the habit of not having to really care all that much about if their stuff works, they'll just push things. And I've seen this happen. Like my favorite developer, he had a work process where he would do some local testing, and then he would be like, he just pushed it to the QA. He didn't even spin up a local instance and try to do it. He was just, yeah, I think that this is going to work, and just pushed it, and then started working on the next thing. He was working on the same thing in parallel, on several things in parallel at the same time, which was kind of fun, because what happens is the thing that this manager seems to be too thick to understand. If you don't take the time to quality check your own stuff before it goes to the QA, it's going to come back with a delay of, depending on how many times you've done this, it can be a few days to a few hours to a few minutes. It depends. And you're wasting time. You're wasting so much time, because every time you push something new, the QA, depending on the QA and the relationship you have with the QA, might have to restart the whole testing process. And that's so fun. Because when a developer, especially when you don't get the scope definition of where the change has happened, conceptually you could have to test the whole thing, but doing exhaustive testing is impractical, so you have to scope it somewhere. And if you don't get that, well, you still have to do the QA work. And the QA, I promise you, the average QA is most likely going to do more testing than the average developer would do if they were to do it themselves, and that's kind of the reason why you have a QA or someone who does the testing. In my team, we always it's just a hard rule: you do not push your code to production without somebody else testing it first. There is no excuse, because we all know the problem of having you test your own code as the only person who tests that code is because you have the problem in your head. In other words, your testing will very often reflect a very specific pattern. And if you don't introduce a bit of randomness or a bit of unforeseen, you might actually just go through a testing process that always ends up working, because you're not testing a realistic case. You're not testing as an external person. You're testing like yourself. and all of a sudden you actually missed a bunch of bugs that you introduced because you didn't actually test those things. You just focused on the thing that you thought that you were affecting. And that's why the QA that's the real purpose of having a QA. I personally believe that investing in a pure QA that doesn't have any involvement in automated testing or anything like that it is probably one of the worst things that you can do. If you don't, you need to manage it really well. Otherwise, if you're going to do it well, because if you get to a point as what the subscriber is describing, where you're literally saying that the developers should not be part of the quality process, they're not going to learn to be better developers. They're going to get lazier, if that's even possible, and the time it takes you to ship something will actually go up. It's not actually because you have created a work process where the feedback loop is much worse than if the developer is actually involved. You will actually produce better code and faster the code faster if the developer is actually part of the testing process. The QA should be involved and to reduce the impact area of the testing. If the developer is sure that his or her feature is working, well, then the QA can focus on all the surrounding stuff, because technically in a really sophisticated system, unless you have automated testing, you could have broken anything. Any line of code could in theory have changed the system so that it breaks in many different circumstances, especially if you have a system with a lot of permutations and a lot of configurations. Well, in that sort of scenario, I mean, if you can't do automated testing, a QA would be a very useful person to just remove the requirement from the developer to deal with all that excess testing in, say, multiple browsers, or like there's like the testing space is so complicated because there's so many things that could have been broken, that if you have a full-time person doing it, you can reduce the workload on the developer. That doesn't mean that they shouldn't do their own testing on their own stuff. It just means that they can offload some of the extra testing that would need to do and then the regression testing to somebody else. I still don't think that that's the right way to go. If I were to say my piece, this is just my personal opinion, you should never hire QA unless that QA is directly involved and directly capable of implementing automated testing. A testing engineer or a person who knows how to help you push your company towards a BDD style of working or a automated test suite or something like that is going to be 100 times more valuable to you than a QA every single time, every single week of the day. And you can I will gladly stand in front of every single member of any IT company and say that, because the return on investment on a pure QA is always going to be linear in a linear thing. The return on investment on a single testing engineer or QA engineer or someone who can actually implement automated testing and help you with automation is going to be an exponential return on investment every single time. So what I want you to take away from this is that if your manager is telling you that you shouldn't test your code because you have a QA that does it, that person is either just saying that you should not test the entire regression testing, because that is a lot of tedious work that you could give to the person who's hired to do that thing. But if they're telling you that you shouldn't even test the code that you are working on, ignore that, because the feedback cycle is going to be so slow, and honestly it's going to make you a worse developer. Because I think that any really good developer should be able to, as Martin Fowler has put it, wear different hats. You can have the developer hat, or you can have the QA hat, where you just focus on testing. And you should test your own code before you ship it over to somebody else. One part is because it helps you become a better software developer, and it gives you a better eye for quality and finding out bugs. And the second thing is that you're wasting a lot of your own time, and also that you're actually going to be sitting on multiple things while you're dealing with while the QA is testing your stuff, and that's going to spread your, like, if you want to be able to focus on one thing, it's not going to be an effective pattern for you. You're going to very quickly find yourself sitting on maybe 3 or 4 or 5 different stories at the same time, and having to context switch every single hour of every day, because things are coming back to you that you missed from the QA, and that means that you now have to pick up that story card again. That's just, I promise you, it's stressful, and it's not a very efficient way of doing work. Have a great day.